My husband didn't just cheat. He forged my signature to drain $350,000 from our paid-off home. His fake separation was a plot to let the bank foreclose and leave me homeless. I knelt on a freezing concrete floor, violently shaking as I held the forged loan documents. But to understand how I got here, I need to take you back to our Adina kitchen. Topic Chapter 1. I lost 25 years of marriage on a rainy Tuesday evening. The weapon of choice wasn't a screaming match. It wasn't a late-night text message from a stranger. It was our marriage counselor. That morning, everything was perfectly normal. I was standing right here at our Adina kitchen island. The warm smell of vanilla hazelnut coffee filled the room. The house was quiet and safe. Vance was adjusting his tie in the reflection of the microwave. He leaned over and kissed my forehead. He said, "See you tonight, hon." He said it with perfect normalcy, just like he had 1,000 times before. I drew up the blueprints of our life. That morning, the foundation felt incredibly solid. By 6:15 p.m., the Minnesota autumn rain was coming down hard against the windows. I was chopping onions for a pot roast. The heavy oak front door opened. Vance walked in. He didn't take off his wet trench coat. He didn't call out my name. He walked straight into the kitchen. He dropped his keys onto the granite counter. The metal clatter echoed sharply in the large room. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. I turned around to face him. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the gray floor tiles. That should have been my first clue. Why couldn't he look me in the eye? He reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a yellow legal pad. He set it on the island right next to his keys. I stepped closer. I could see his familiar handwriting in blue ink. It was a neat list of bullet points. He took a deep breath. He said, "I spoke with Dr. Thorne today." Dr. Eris Thorne was our marriage counselor. We had been seeing him for 3 months. I thought we were making incredible progress. We were finally communicating. Vance cleared his throat. He said, "Dr. Thorne believes our dynamic has become toxic." My hands went ice cold. I gripped the edge of the cold granite counter. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my throat. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. Vance kept talking. He was reading directly from that yellow legal pad. He said Dr. Thorne strongly recommended a 6-month hard separation. I just stared at the paper. I could read the bulleted words upside down. Enmeshment. Trauma bonding. Codependency. The math wasn't mathing. Vance was a commercial real estate broker. He didn't talk like that. He didn't use therapy buzzwords. They sounded completely unnatural rolling off his tongue. He was reciting a rehearsed script, but I was too deep in shock to see the performance. I asked him what he meant. I asked him when he even talked to Dr. Thorne. Our appointments were always on Thursdays. Today was Tuesday. He just shook his head. He kept staring at the granite counter, avoiding my face. He said, "It's for the best, Astrid. We need strict boundaries." My chest was tight. I couldn't pull enough air into my lungs. The kitchen suddenly felt completely suffocating. He was dismantling our entire existence. He was doing it right there between the chopped onions and his wet coat. I didn't fight him. I was too completely blindsided to fight. I walked slowly upstairs to our master bedroom. The hallway felt 10 miles long. I pulled his leather duffel bag from the closet. I packed his bags with tears streaming down my face, believing I was the toxic one. I wouldn't find out the terrifying truth for another 72 hours. Top it. Chapter 2. I zipped up the brown leather duffel bag. My hands were trembling so hard the metal zipper clinked. Vance grabbed the handles. He didn't even look at me. He just walked down the hallway. His boot sounded heavy on the hardwood. He opened the heavy oak front door. The cold November air rushed into the entryway. Then the door clicked shut. The deadbolt didn't even turn. Gone. Just like that. I stood there on the gray floor tiles. The silence in the house was absolutely deafening. I looked over at the kitchen. The clock on the microwave read 7:14 p.m. He said we needed 72 hours of zero contact. A hard reset, he called it. So the countdown began. I actually believed him. I stood in that empty hallway and really thought I was the toxic one. 25 years of marriage. You don't just draft up a life that complex and walk away. I drew up the blueprints of our life together. I thought the foundation was solid, but I thought I was too demanding. I thought my long hours at the architectural firm had ruined us. That's exactly why we started seeing Dr. Thorne 6 months ago. I needed to understand what was happening. I walked down the hall into my home office. I turned on the brass desk lamp. The yellow light spilled across my drafting table. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my metal filing cabinet. The runners squeaked. I took out the thick blue folder. It held all our medical records. I found the intake paperwork for Dr. Thorne's clinic, 5 pages stapled together. I stared at the address printed at the top of the first page. The clinic was located in St. Paul on Grand Avenue. That was a 45-minute drive from Vance's commercial real estate office in Edina. 4 months ago, Vance told me he needed solo therapy sessions. He used those exact words from the yellow legal pad. Childhood blockages. He booked these solo appointments for every Tuesday at 4 in the afternoon. With the drive time and the hour-long session, he was unaccounted for until almost 7. Every single Tuesday. I thought he was healing. I thought he was doing the work. I left the office and walked slowly into the master bedroom closet. I turned on the overhead light. His side of the closet looked so bare. Only his heavy winter coats were left hanging there. I reached out and touched the wool sleeve of his gray peacoat. I leaned in. I closed my eyes and took a breath. There it was. That phantom smell. Every Tuesday evening he came home smelling faintly of warm vanilla. It wasn't cologne. It wasn't his usual cedar body wash. It was sweet. It was cloying. It smelled like cheap lotion. I asked him about it once while we were making dinner. He laughed. He didn't miss a beat. He said the clinic's waiting room had a vanilla plug-in air freshener. I bought that lie. I swallowed it whole. I should have known something was fundamentally wrong 2 months ago. I was sitting right at my drafting desk working on a commercial floor plan. Vance came in. He took my silver laptop right out of my hands. He said he was updating our banking passwords for security. He stood over the keyboard. His broad shoulders completely blocked the glowing screen. I tried to look around him. He shifted his weight to block my view. He told me he set up a complex 2-factor authentication for our Wells Fargo accounts. Checking, savings, and the joint credit cards. All locked down. He said he was handling all the finances to reduce my mental load. If I tried to log in, he said the new security protocol would lock us both out. I thanked him. I literally thanked the man for taking away my financial access. The math wasn't mathing, but my brain just kept making excuses for him. I sat down hard on the carpeted closet floor. The scent of vanilla was still lingering in the tight space. I hugged my knees to my chest. My breathing felt shallow and tight. I was so proud of him for finally doing the hard emotional work. God, I was an idiot. Topic Chapter 3. I was still sitting on the closet floor, hugging my knees to my chest. The gray floor tiles felt like solid ice seeping through my jeans. I felt so incredibly foolish. My chest was tight with panic. My own husband of 25 years had just locked me out of our entire financial life. Checking, savings. Even the Wells Fargo credit cards. Gone. Just like that. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw sparks. The 72-hour no-contact clock was officially ticking. I was supposed to sit here and reflect on my toxic behavior. That was his narrative. But my brain was doing that thing where it starts replaying recent events on a loop. I thought back to just an hour earlier. I was standing in the master bedroom helping him pack. He told me he was going to the Residence Inn down in Bloomington. Just a standard corporate extended stay hotel, nothing fancy. But his packing list was bizarre. I had watched him empty the metal lockbox from the home office. He took his dark blue passport. He took his birth certificate. He even carefully slid his social security card into a plastic sleeve. I asked him why he needed those vital records for a 3-day hotel stay. He wouldn't look up from his brown leather duffel bag. He just kept folding his dress shirts perfectly. He finally said, "The hotel safe is more secure than our firebox." Then I saw him slip another thick envelope into his leather briefcase. I recognized the heavy beige paper. It was the title deed to my car. My stomach did a slow, sickening flip. I didn't say anything. I just watched him zip the bag shut. That was it. That was the missing piece. That was why he couldn't look me in the eye downstairs in the kitchen. He wasn't overwhelmed by our marital issues. He wasn't seeking space to heal. He was actively stealing the blueprints of our life. Right in front of me. It was exactly 7:14 p.m. I heard the heavy oak front door click shut downstairs. I'd pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hands were shaking. I opened the Ring doorbell app. I pulled up the live feed of our front driveway. The yellow porch light illuminated his silver Audi in the dark. Vance wasn't just carrying his leather duffel bag. He was lugging the entire heavy, locked firebox from our home office. He shoved it into the trunk. He slammed the lid shut. A sharp, cold suspicion spiked in my chest. I watched his taillights disappear down the street. The math wasn't mathing. I needed to see what else he took. I got up from the closet floor. I walked out to the living room. The house was dead quiet. The only light came from the street lamps outside. I saw his old silver iPad sitting on the glass coffee table. He had left it behind in his rush to get out. I sat down on the sofa. I picked up the heavy tablet. The screen lit up my face in the dark. No passcode. I tapped the Safari icon on the home screen. He had left a browser tab open. It was a Chase credit card portal. This was our old joint emergency card. The one we kept for major home repairs. The one he clearly forgot to lock me out of. I started scrolling through the recent digital statements. It was mostly normal stuff. Gas at Quick Trip, groceries at Lund's, a random Tuesday lunch at Panera. And then I saw it. A charge for exactly $140. The merchant name read, Public Storage Minnetonka. I stared at the bright white screen. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I checked the date on the transaction, October 17th, 3 weeks before this sudden separation, 3 weeks before Dr. Thorne supposedly told him to leave. My breathing got shallow. I tapped on the charge to expand the billing details. It was a recurring monthly payment, set up on auto pay. I am an architectural draftsman. I know exactly how much physical space things take up. I know what you can fit in a standard storage unit. I sat there in the dark living room, staring at that iPad. Why would a man moving into a fully furnished corporate hotel room need a 10 by 10 storage unit on the other side of town? I sat in the dark living room for hours. The silver iPad was still glowing on my lap. The Chase portal showed that recurring Minnetonka storage fee, $140 a month. My brain was trying to build a floor plan out of puzzle pieces, but the angles were all wrong. Nothing fit together. I didn't sleep for a single second that night. The next morning, the sun came up over Edina. It was Wednesday. The sky was a brutal, freezing gray. I was standing at the kitchen island. The house was completely dead quiet. The 72-hour no-contact rule was suffocating me. My chest felt incredibly tight. I couldn't catch a full breath. I needed professional help to survive the separation. I picked up my phone from the cold granite counter. I opened my contacts list. I scrolled down to Dr. Eris Thorne. Vance had told me Dr. Thorne recommended this break. He said I needed to work on my toxic traits. He said I was the reason our foundation was cracking. Fine, I would do the work. I tapped the green call button. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. The screen was smeared with my fingerprints. The call connected after 3 rings. Grand Avenue Counseling, this is Sarah. I cleared my dry throat. Hi, Sarah. This is Astrid Lindquist. I need to schedule an emergency solo session. My husband Vance and I just started our separation. There was a very long pause on the line. I heard the rapid clacking of a keyboard. Mrs. Lindquist, let me transfer you directly to Dr. Thorne. That was weird. Receptionists schedule appointments. They don't transfer you to the doctor's direct line. The hold music started playing. It was some awful jazz flute over a static connection. I paced back and forth across the gray floor tiles. I stared at the stainless steel refrigerator. My stomach was tied in tight knots. Then the line clicked. Astrid, it's Dr. Thorne. Her voice was extremely gentle. Too gentle. Hi, Dr. Thorne. Vance left last night. I know you recommended a 6-month hard separation. I'm calling because I want to start my solo work. Another pause. The silence felt incredibly heavy. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but your brain keeps making excuses? That was me standing in my kitchen. Astrid, Dr. Thorne said. I never recommended a separation. I froze. My fingers tightened painfully around the phone case. What do you mean? I asked. Vance said you told him we needed time apart. Dr. Thorne sighed. It was a sad, heavy sound. Astrid, I haven't seen Vance in 3 months. The kitchen floor seemed to violently tilt under my feet. I grabbed the edge of the granite counter to stay upright. The stone was freezing against my palm. That's impossible, I whispered into the receiver. He goes to your clinic on Grand Avenue every Tuesday at 4. Our last session was October 12th, she said softly. He canceled all future appointments. My mind violently snapped back to October 26th, 2 months ago. Vance had walked through our heavy oak front door. He was wearing his gray peacoat. He was actively crying. He dropped his leather briefcase on the floor. He told me how incredibly draining therapy was that day. I remembered him wiping fake tears from his pale green eyes. He had looked right at me and sobbed. He said he was fighting so hard for our marriage. He said the therapist was making him dig deep into his childhood trauma. All a performance. A flawless, calculated performance. "Are you still there, Astrid?" Dr. Thorne asked. "Yes," I choked out. "I have to go." I hung up the phone. I stood perfectly still in the kitchen. I stared down at my phone screen. The call log showed a 4-minute conversation, exactly 4 minutes with Grand Avenue Counseling. The time at the top of the screen read 10:15 a.m. That was the exact moment my reality completely fractured. The math wasn't mathing. None of it was real. The separation wasn't a medical recommendation. It was a staged eviction. He had manufactured a psychological crisis to get out of the house. He weaponized our marriage counselor against me. I walked slowly out of the kitchen. I went into the hallway entryway. I opened the closet door. I stared at the empty hook, the exact spot where his gray peacoat usually hung. The coat that always smelled like warm, cloying vanilla on Tuesday nights. He blames that smell on a cheap clinic air freshener. My stomach violently turned over. I felt physically sick. The blueprints of our life were entirely forged. If he hadn't been at the therapist's office every Tuesday at 4 p.m. for the last 12 weeks, where the hell was he? Topic Chapter 5. The smell of vanilla wasn't from a clinic air freshener, it was from a woman. It was Wednesday morning, exactly 10:15 a.m. I was still standing in the master closet. I stared at the empty brass hook where his gray peacoat usually hung. The math wasn't mathing. 72 hours of no contact, a staged eviction disguised as marital therapy. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. My husband was living a completely secret life. I had to find out where he actually was. I walked out of the closet and down the hallway. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet. I went straight into the guest bedroom. The house was suffocatingly silent. The old silver iPad was still sitting on the glass nightstand. I picked it up. The metal casing felt freezing against my palms. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. Vance thought he was so incredibly careful. He took the metal firebox. He took my heavy beige car title. He locked me out of every single Wells Fargo account. But he forgot about the foundational framework of our digital life. Years ago, we shared an Apple ID. We set it up to sync our grocery lists and calendars. He upgraded his devices, but he never actually unlinked this old tablet. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped the iPad. I unlocked the screen. The glass was still smudged with his fingerprints. I swiped over to the second page of apps. I found the utilities folder. I tapped the Find My icon. The screen went blindingly white for a second. A green radar circle started spinning in the center. I could feel my heartbeat pounding violently in my throat. I told myself to just breathe. I fully expected the digital map to zoom in on Bloomington. He explicitly told me he was checking into the Residence Inn off the highway. He said he needed a sterile, neutral hotel room to process his grief. The map finally loaded. The little blue dot wasn't in Bloomington. It wasn't anywhere near a Residence Inn. The GPS dot was pulsing steadily in Wayzata. Wayzata is an affluent, heavily wooded lakeside suburb. It is 20 miles in the exact opposite direction of his supposed hotel. I pinched the glass screen to zoom in. The street name slowly materialized on the map. Willow Creek Lane. I zoomed in even closer. The blue dot was perfectly stationary. It was parked right on top of 1440 Willow Creek Lane. I stared at the address. I drew up the blueprints of our life, and I know the city's grid. As a draftsman, I know every zoning map in Hennepin County. That specific street didn't even exist on the older plat maps. It is a brand new luxury development. Custom architectural builds, multi-million-dollar properties sitting right on the water. Why was my husband parked at a Wayzata mansion on a Wednesday morning? I sat completely frozen on the guest bed. The iPad felt like a lead weight in my lap. I pulled out my own phone. I typed the address into a real estate database. The property details loaded instantly. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms. A 4-car garage is sold exactly 8 months ago. That was right around the time he locked me out of the checking accounts. The structural supports of his lie were becoming visible. A secret storage unit in Minnetonka. A fake therapy clinic on Grand Avenue. A stationary blue dot in Wayzata. He wasn't just having a casual affair, he had purchased real estate. He had built an entirely separate existence. I looked at the blue dot pulsing on the screen. It was just sitting there, mocking me. The warm, cloying scent of vanilla drifted through my memory. Whoever lived in that massive house wore that cheap perfume, and Vance was with her right now. He was playing house during his mandatory therapist-ordered isolation. I felt the last shred of my panic burn away. It was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. He thought he could just draft a new life and erase me from the plans. I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight toward the blue dot. Topic Chapter 6. I didn't cry on the drive to Wayzata. My tears dried up somewhere on Interstate 49-4. I just felt cold. A deep, freezing calm had settled in my chest. I gripped the leather steering wheel of my Subaru. My knuckles were completely white. The heater in my car was blasting, but I was shivering. The GPS on my phone guided me toward Lake Minnetonka. The blue dot from Vance's old iPad blinked on the screen. It was pulling me toward 1440 Willow Creek Lane. Wayzata is old money. It's all towering oak trees and hidden private driveways. The air always feels 10 degrees colder near the lake. The sky was a heavy, overcast gray. I turned onto Willow Creek Lane. I killed the engine half a block from the address. I parked under a massive weeping willow. Its bare winter branches hid my car from the street. I stared through the windshield. The house wasn't just a house, it was a brand new luxury townhouse. As a draftsman, I know construction costs. I drew up the blueprints of our life. I knew exactly what things cost. The dark cedar siding and massive floor-to-ceiling windows screamed custom build. The architectural stone veneer alone was worth a fortune. It was easily a $3 million property. And right there in the pristine concrete driveway was Vance's silver Audi. The math wasn't mathing. My husband was supposed to be separated from me. He told me he needed space. He was supposed to be soul-searching at the Residence Inn down in Bloomington. Instead, he was parked at a multi-million-dollar estate. I wasn't weeping anymore. I was calculating. I sat in that Subaru all of Wednesday morning. I watched the house. Nothing happened. The house stayed completely dark. Not a single curtain moved, so I drove home to Adina. But I came back. The next day, Thursday, I parked in the exact same spot. I kept my dash cam running. I drank lukewarm coffee from a metal thermos. I just watched the heavy oak front door. My car heater was broken today, so my breath plumed in the cold air. At exactly 2:45 p.m., the brass handle turned. The door swung open. Vance walked out onto the slate porch. He was wearing his gray pea coat, the same coat he wore to his fake therapy sessions. He looked relaxed. He looked happy. He didn't look like a man going through a devastating separation. He wasn't alone. A younger woman followed him out. She had long dark braids cascading down her back. She was wearing a fitted emerald green dress. She looked like she belonged in a magazine. She definitely belonged in that expensive house. She had this effortless, wealthy glow about her. I grabbed my iPhone from the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I opened the camera app. I zoomed in as far as the lens would go. The image was grainy, but it was clear enough. I pressed the shutter button. The screen captured it perfectly. A zoomed-in photo of my reality crumbling. Vance's hand was resting intimately on her lower back. He leaned in. He kissed her right there on the porch. He kissed her like he used to kiss me. My dash cam recorded the whole thing. The timestamp stamped it forever. Thursday, 2:45 p.m. The Audi backed out of the driveway. The woman stood on the porch, waving. As the silver car rolled past my hidden Subaru, I cracked my window. I don't know why I did it. A cold breeze blew off the lake. It carried something straight into my car. The unmistakable cloying scent of warm vanilla. My stomach violently lurched. My mind snapped back to 1 month ago. I was standing in our master bedroom closet in Edina. I had my face buried in the wool fabric of that exact gray peacoat. I was inhaling that same suffocating sweetness. I had desperately tried to convince myself it was just a cheap clinic air freshener. It wasn't. The vanilla scent was her. It had always been her. It was her signature perfume. Every Tuesday, he wasn't crying on Dr. Thorne's leather couch. He was here. He was playing house with a woman in a green dress. He had built an entirely separate existence. I rolled the window up. I watched the Audi disappear around the wooded bend. I looked back at the sprawling custom townhouse. How did he finance this? You don't just hide a massive mortgage from your wife of 25 years. You don't buy a $3 million home in secret. Not without leaving a massive paper trail. I thought about the locked Wells Fargo accounts. I thought about the heavy beige car title he stole. I sat in the freezing car staring at the photo on my phone. I thought I was looking at the end of my marriage. I had no idea I was actually looking at the scene of a federal crime. Topic Chapter 7. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't march up to that custom oak door and demand answers. My hands were frozen to the Subaru steering wheel. The heater was blasting, but I couldn't feel my fingers. I just sat there in the freezing car. I stared at the grainy photo on my phone. Vance kissing the woman in the emerald green dress. I was looking at the scene of a federal crime. I just knew it. I'd put the car in drive and pulled away from 1440 Willow Creek Lane. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. My brain was doing that thing where it compartmentalizes trauma into actionable steps. I knew exactly where I needed to go next. It took me 22 minutes to reach the public storage facility in Minnetonka. The building was a massive, windowless orange block right off Interstate 49-4. I parked near the glass double doors of the front office. My boots crunched on the salted pavement. The wind was howling, biting through my thin sweater. I hadn't even grabbed a coat when I left my house. I walked into the brightly lit lobby. The manager was a kid in his 20s wearing a blue polo shirt. He was eating a bag of chips behind the laminate counter. I walked right up to him. I kept my voice completely flat. I told him I lost the key to Unit 408. He stopped chewing and asked for my ID. I reached into my purse and pulled out my driver's license. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it on the gray floor tiles. He took the plastic card and started typing on his keyboard. It was a terrifying 30 seconds. The clacking of the keys echoed in the empty room. I held my breath. Then he looked up. He pushed his glasses up his nose. He said, "Your name is on the Joint Chase credit card on file. I can cut the lock for a $50 fee." I didn't hesitate. I pulled a crisp $50 bill from my wallet and slid it across the counter. We took the freight elevator to the 4th floor. We walked down a long, fluorescent-lit hallway. The air smelled like dry dust and cheap industrial pine cleaner. The overhead lights hummed with a low electric buzz. We stopped in front of a bright orange rolling door. Unit 408. The kid took out a pair of heavy metal bolt cutters. The steel padlock snapped with a loud crack. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. He pulled the rolling metal door up. It rattled like a freight train on rusted tracks. Then he turned around and walked away. I stepped inside Unit 408. I expected to see boxes of clothes, or maybe new furniture waiting for the Wayzata house. There was nothing like that. The concrete floor was completely bare, except for the exact center of the room. A cheap white plastic folding table sat under the single overhead light bulb. On top of the table was our heavy metal firebox, the exact one Vance took from our bedroom closet. Next to it were 4 thick manila folders. They were stacked in a perfectly neat pile. My chest felt incredibly tight. I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. I walked over to the folding table. My boots echoed on the empty concrete. I stared at the metal firebox. The math wasn't mathing until this exact second. Vance had told me he needed his passport and social security card. He claimed the Residence Inn safe was more secure than our house. That was a lie. You don't need a birth certificate to check into a hotel in Bloomington, but you absolutely need one to close on a $3 million real estate transaction. He wasn't packing for a separation, he was packing for a closing date. I reached out and opened the first manila folder. It was a thick stack of legal papers from a title company. The paper was heavy and crisp under my fingertips. I flipped past the cover sheet. The address was printed in bold black ink at the top of the page. 1440 Willow Creek Lane. Right below the address was a name. Cleo Vreeland. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was suffocating in that dusty storage unit. Cleo Vreeland. The woman in the emerald green dress. The woman who smelled like warm cooling vanilla. There was a security camera mounted in the corner of the hallway ceiling outside. The timestamp would have read exactly Thursday 4:12 p.m. If you pulled that footage, you would see me standing frozen inside the open unit. You would see the second file folder slip right out of my hands. You would see the paper scatter across the cold concrete floor. Because the blueprint of his fraud was finally laid out right in front of me. Vance didn't just buy a house with this Cleo woman. He used our entire 25-year financial history to do it. I knelt down on the cold floor to gather the spilled papers. My eyes caught the bottom of a thick loan agreement. I opened the top folder and saw my own signature staring back at me on a document I had never seen in my life. I knelt on the freezing concrete floor of Unit 408. The thick loan agreement shook in my hands. My own signature stared back at me in blue ink. It was a perfect forgery. Every loop and slant of my name was exact. My lungs completely forgot how to pull in air. I looked up at the cheap white plastic folding table. The heavy metal firebox still sat there under the single overhead light bulb. It was completely unopened. I didn't even need to crack the steel padlock. I already held the blueprint of my own financial ruin. $3 million. A 30-year mortgage secretly attached to my name. My hands were numb as I shoved the manila folders into my leather purse. I pulled the rolling metal door shut and locked it. I drove back to Adina in complete silence. I sat at my granite kitchen island all night long. The microwave clock blinked 3 a.m., then 4 a.m., then 4 a.m., then 5 a.m. The math wasn't mathing, so I drew up the blueprints of my own survival. At exactly 8 a.m. on Friday morning, I picked up my phone. I called Vance. He answered on the second ring. His voice sounded groggy, like he was just waking up. I told him to meet me at the Caribou Coffee on France Avenue. I hung up before he could ask any questions. I got there early and bought a black coffee. I crumpled the printed receipt in my left hand. The timestamp said 8:47 a.m. It was the last normal cup of coffee I would ever buy. Vance walked through the heavy glass doors at exactly 9 a.m. He was wearing that same gray peacoat. Even from 10 feet away, I could smell her warm vanilla perfume. He sat down across from me at a small corner laminate table. He had ordered a vanilla hazelnut coffee at the counter. Vance looked incredibly nervous. His fingers were aggressively tearing a white paper napkin into tiny strips. He looked at me and said, "Astrid, what's going on?" I didn't say a single word. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my iPhone. I didn't mention the Minnetonka storage unit. I didn't mention the forged loan agreement hidden in my purse. I just opened the grainy photo I took yesterday. The one of him kissing Cleo Vreeland in the Wayzata driveway. I slid the glowing screen across the table. Vance looked down at the phone, the color completely drained from his face. He stared at the younger woman in the emerald green dress. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the dam finally broke. Vance completely fell apart right there in the crowded coffee shop. He buried his face in his hands and started sobbing. He choked out, "I'm so sorry, Astrid." He admitted to the affair right then and there. He said he was too cowardly to tell me the truth. That was his excuse for the fake therapy sessions. He confessed that Dr. Thorne never suggested a 72-hour separation. He made the whole thing up to buy uninterrupted time with Cleo. He begged for my forgiveness. He reached across the table and tried to grab my hand. I pulled my arm back sharply. I watched his tears fall directly into his vanilla hazelnut coffee. I felt absolutely nothing, just a cold, icy detachment. It instantly reminded me of our wedding day back in 1998. We were standing at the altar in a little stone church. He made this exact same tearful, pleading face. He was reciting his vows with heavy tears in his eyes. 25 years ago, I thought his tears were beautiful. Now, I knew it was just a calculated performance. He was a master architect of emotional manipulation. I let him cry for another 3 full minutes. A barista behind the counter was openly staring at us. I didn't care. I finally stood up from the wooden chair. I looked down at the man I had loved for 2 decades. I said, "I am filing for divorce, Vance." He choked on a loud sob and begged me to wait. I didn't look back. I pushed through the glass doors into the freezing Friday morning air. I walked to my car feeling a twisted sense of closure. I thought I had won the game. I thought confronting him about the affair was the climax of this nightmare. But the tears he cried at that coffee shop were a distraction. They were just a smokescreen for the real betrayal. Top of chapter 9. I didn't go home after leaving that Caribou coffee. I couldn't. The real betrayal was sitting right next to me. My leather purse felt like it weighed 50 pounds on the passenger seat. Inside it were the 4 thick manila folders and the forged loan agreement. Vance thought he was so smart. He thought his little crying performance at the kitchen island would keep me distracted. He thought I was sitting in our Edina house weeping over his affair with Cleo Vreeland. I wasn't. I was calculating. I drove my Subaru straight up Interstate 35W. The Friday morning traffic was brutal. Brake lights flared red all the way to the city. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The heater was blasting, but I was shivering. I was heading to downtown Minneapolis, to the law office of Sterling Ashworth. Sterling is a ruthless divorce attorney. He has a reputation for absolutely dismantling cheating husbands. I expected a standard asset division conversation. I thought we would sit down and talk about alimony. I thought we would discuss splitting the joint Chase accounts and the 401k. I parked in the underground concrete ramp. I took the express elevator up to the 42nd floor. Sterling's office smelled like expensive leather and lemon floor wax. I sat in a high-backed leather chair across from him. The Minneapolis skyline looked gray and unforgiving through his floor-to-ceiling windows. I opened my purse. The metal zipper scraped loudly in the quiet room. I pulled out the manila folders. I dropped them onto his massive mahogany desk. They landed with a heavy, sickening thud. "My husband is having an affair," I said. "But that's not why I'm here." Sterling didn't say a word. He just nodded slowly. He reached into his suit jacket and put on his silver-rimmed glasses. He opened the first folder. I watched his eyes scan the title company papers. The heavy grandfather clock in the corner of his office ticked. It was exactly 10:14 a.m. He picked up the thick loan agreement. He spread it flat on his mahogany desk. He smoothed the creases with his palms. It was a home equity line of credit agreement. A HELOC. I leaned forward to look at the crisp white pages. There was a signature on the bottom line. It was a perfectly forged replica of my signature. Vance had nailed every loop of my cursive. Right next to it was a blue ink stamp. A mobile notary stamp. It was dated October 17th. The exact same week Vance rented that Minnetonka storage unit. My stomach turned over. I tasted bitter coffee and bile in the back of my throat. You know that feeling when the ground just drops out from under you? That's what this was. Sterling kept reading. He flipped to the second page, then the third. I watched the color completely drain from his face. The healthy pink flush left his cheeks. Sterling Ashworth has seen every dirty trick in the legal book. He doesn't get surprised. But right now his jaw was clenched tight. A muscle ticked in his cheek. The silence in the room became suffocating. A creeping dread crawled up the back of my neck. The math wasn't mathing. Something was terribly wrong. Much worse than a secret $3 million townhouse in Wayzata. Finally, Sterling stopped reading. He looked up at me. "Astrid," he said. His voice was deadly quiet. "I need you to look at this page very carefully." He spun the document around on the polished wood. He tapped his heavy gold pen right next to the notary stamp. "Did you sign this?" he asked. I stared at the bright blue ink. "No," I said. "I've never seen that paper in my life." Sterling leaned back in his leather chair. The leather creaked loudly. He let out a long, slow breath. He looked back down at the forged signature. Then he looked at the Wayzata property deed. I could hear my own pulse thumping in my ears. My hands were freezing cold. I clutched the padded armrests of the chair. I needed him to tell me what I was looking at. I drew up the blueprints of our life. I thought I knew every structural flaw. But I'd missed the foundation crumbling entirely. Sterling took off his glasses. His hands were actually shaking. "Astrid," he whispered. "Vance didn't just cheat on you. He stole your house." "He stole my house." The words hung in the sterile air of Sterling's 42nd floor office. I just stared at her. My chest felt incredibly tight. Sterling slid the forged loan agreement across her massive mahogany desk. She tapped a perfectly manicured fingernail right on my signature. "This is a home equity line of credit, Astrid," she said gently. "A HELOC for exactly $350,000. I couldn't breathe. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind her started to spin. Our house in Edina was completely paid off. We spent 15 years putting every extra cent into that mortgage. I drew up the blueprints of our life in that house. Now Sterling was telling me Vance had mortgaged it to the hilt." I looked down at the heavy paper. Right next to my forged signature was a bright blue ink stamp, a mobile notary stamp. Dated October 17th. Sterling pulled her silver laptop closer and started typing furiously. "He bypassed the in-person bank requirements," she said. "He used a corrupt mobile notary to legitimize the forged signatures." She turned the glowing screen toward me. The notary's name was listed as active in Hennepin County. But the business address was just a P.O. box. A P.O. box in Minnetonka, right down the street from his storage unit. My hand started shaking uncontrollably. I gripped the padded arms of the high-backed leather chair. The math wasn't mathing. How could he take out a massive loan without me seeing the bank statements? Then it hit me like a physical blow to the ribs. My stomach dropped to the floor. 2 months ago, I remembered standing at our kitchen island chopping onions for a pot roast. The house smelled like savory beef and rosemary. Vance was sitting at the granite counter with his old silver iPad. He smiled at me. That warm, dimpled smile I had trusted for 25 years. He told me he was updating our Wells Fargo accounts. He said he was setting up a complex two-factor authentication. He claimed it was to protect our life savings from online hackers. He insisted on handling all the online banking so I wouldn't have to worry. I thanked him. I actually poured him a cup of vanilla hazelnut coffee and thanked him. He wasn't protecting us from hackers. He was locking me out. He was hiding the fact that he just drained $350,000 of our equity. Sterling's sharp voice pulled me back to the present. She had logged into a legal back-end system using the account numbers from the file. A large printer in the corner for office hummed to life. She handed me the fresh Wells Fargo portal printouts. The thick paper was still warm from the machine. I scanned the lines of black text. There it was. A massive withdrawal on October 18th. Exactly $350,000. Wire transferred directly to a commercial title company. The exact same title company that closed on 1440 Willow Creek Lane. He used the equity of my home to buy a mansion for Cleo Vreeland. He bought it outright. In her name. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Sterling, I whispered. What happens to my house? She took off her silver-rimmed glasses. She didn't look away from me. Astrid, the monthly payments on a loan this size are astronomical. If they aren't paid, the bank will foreclose on the Edina house. The large office went completely silent. Only the heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner made a sound. Suddenly, every single lie clicked in a perfect, terrifying place. The fake therapy sessions. The yellow legal pad with the blue ink buzzwords. Dr. Thorne's supposed recommendation for a 72-hour hard separation. It wasn't about getting space. It wasn't about a midlife crisis. He wanted me to pack a bag and leave the house voluntarily. He wanted to establish a physical separation on paper. He was going to let the Edina house go into foreclosure. He would let the bank evict me while he lived debt-free in Wayzata. He was going to claim he lost everything in the divorce. Meanwhile, he had a $3 million asset hidden under his mistress's name. My own husband orchestrated a staged eviction. He weaponized our marriage counselor to get me out of my own home. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my throat, my vision blurred with hot, angry tears. But I didn't cry. I swallowed them down hard. I gripped the forged loan agreement so tight the paper crumpled in my fist. This wasn't just infidelity, this was a calculated financial execution. He thought I was sitting in a Bloomington hotel room right now. He thought I was crying over our broken marriage. He thought he had completely outsmarted me. I looked across the mahogany desk at Sterling. "Can we save my house?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed. She picked up a heavy gold pen. "We aren't just going to save your house, Astrid. We are going to burn his new life to the absolute ground." I nodded slowly. The suffocating panic was gone. Only pure freezing rage remained. I thought about that heavy metal firebox, the one still sitting on the cheap folding table in Unit 408. If this is the evidence he carelessly left in his briefcase, what was he actually hiding? My husband wasn't leaving me to find himself. He was leaving me to financially bury me alive. I drove back to the public storage facility in Minnetonka. It was Friday morning. The sky outside was the color of dirty concrete. I brought heavy metal bolt cutters this time. The freight elevator groaned loudly as it carried me to the 4th floor. I walked down the long, freezing hallway to Unit 408. The heavy metal firebox was still sitting exactly where I left it. It rested on that cheap white plastic folding table. I positioned the bolt cutters over the thick steel padlock. My hands were sweating despite the cold. I squeezed the long handles with everything I had. The metal snapped with a sharp, violent crack. The sound echoed down the empty hallway. I pulled the heavy lid open. A wave of stale air hit my face. Underneath the dust, I smelled it again, that cloying, warm vanilla perfume. Cleo's scent was literally inside my secure lockbox. I looked down at the contents. There were 3 items inside. The original unfalsified deed to my Adina house, a cheap black burner phone, and a stack of glossy business cards held together by a rubber band. I picked up the cards. They belonged to a mobile notary. The address on the cards matched the P.O. box in Minnetonka. This is the corrupt notary who stamped my forged signature in bright blue ink. I packed everything into my leather purse and drove straight home. By noon, I was standing at my kitchen island. The gray floor tiles felt like ice through my socks. My phone vibrated violently against the granite counter. It was Sterling. He didn't bother saying hello. He just said, "Check your email right now." I put a private investigator on Cleo Vreeland. I opened my silver laptop. The hinge squeaked slightly in the quiet kitchen. I clicked on the incoming email from Sterling's law office. There was one attachment. It was a digital clipping from a Miami newspaper. The dateline was from exactly 4 years ago. I stared at the glowing screen. It was a police mugshot. The woman in the photo had dark brown hair instead of blonde. But I knew that sharp, angular face. I knew those cold amber eyes. The headline made my stomach drop. Local mortgage broker indicted for wire fraud. Her name wasn't Cleo Vreeland back then. She was listed as Chloe Vance. She lost her Florida broker's license for orchestrating massive real estate scams. She had targeted wealthy couples and stolen their home equity. I leaned heavily against the kitchen island. The edge of the granite dug into my ribs. For weeks, the math wasn't mathing. No, the equation was perfectly clear. Vance wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just a pathetic, middle-aged man having a midlife crisis. Cleo saw him coming from a mile away. She realized he had a paid-off $1-million house in Adina. She realized he had a trusting wife who managed the daily bills. Cleo orchestrated the entire he-like scam. She provided the corrupt notary from Minnetonka. She walked Vance through the forgery step by step. She used our 25-year financial history to steal $350,000. I closed my eyes. I pictured that grainy dashcam footage from Thursday afternoon. I remembered seeing Cleo kiss Vance in the Wayzata driveway. I thought it was just a younger woman clinging to her rich boyfriend. I was so incredibly wrong. I remembered the way her amber eyes looked sharply up and down the street. She wasn't being affectionate. She was scanning for witnesses. She was securing her $3 million investment. She was playing him. I opened my eyes and looked around my kitchen. The stainless steel refrigerator hummed quietly. The forged loan documents were sitting next to my laptop. My breathing slowed down. The suffocating panic was entirely gone. It was replaced by cold, absolute clarity. I drew up the blueprints of our life. Vance handed them directly to a professional criminal. He locked me out of our Wells Fargo accounts to hide this theft. He faked a mental breakdown to get me out of the house. All of it was designed to let my home go into foreclosure. I picked up the mobile notary's business card. I traced the raised lettering with my thumb. How do you trap a grifter and a fool? Vance thought he was the mastermind of his new life. He was just the mark, and I was the collateral damage. Topic Chapter 12. I plugged the cheap black burner phone into my Subaru's center console. The battery icon blinked green. I held my breath. I didn't even need a passcode. The screen unlocked immediately. My hands were surprisingly steady. The screen lit up with a single text thread. The contact name was just the letter C. I tapped it. I scrolled to the very top. The messages went back exactly 8 months. They started the exact same week he locked me out of the Wells Fargo accounts. The math was finally mathing. I read the messages out loud to the empty car. Did you get the notary stamp? Yes, she's meeting me at the Minnetonka storage unit. Then I saw the most recent message. It was sent at 11 a.m. today. The HELOC money cleared. Get her to sign the final paper tonight, then we're done. I dialed Sterling Ashworth immediately. I put him on speakerphone. The Bluetooth audio echoed loudly in the quiet car. I told him everything. I told him about the burner phone. I told him about the Florida mugshot of Chloe Vance. I told him about the texts. I heard Sterling take a sharp, heavy breath. He didn't sound like a calm divorce attorney anymore. He said, "Astrid, listen to me very carefully. This isn't just a messy divorce. This is organized, premeditated wire fraud." He told me I was in immediate danger of losing the Adina house. He told me to drive straight to the police. I pulled into the Adina police station parking lot on West 50th Street. It was 2:30 p.m. The lobby smelled distinctly like burnt coffee and industrial floor wax. I walked up to the bulletproof class. I asked for the financial fraud division. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Stellan. He had thinning gray hair and a deeply tired face. I sat at his scratched metal desk. I opened my leather purse. I laid out the blueprints of our life. I placed the forged HELOC agreement on the desk. I pointed to the bright blue mobile notary stamp. I showed him the glossy business cards from the firebox. I handed him the printed Miami mugshot of Cleo. Finally, I slid the black burner phone across the metal desk. The screen was still open to the text messages. Detective Stellan put on his silver-rimmed reading glasses. He studied the forged signature. He read the texts. He looked up at me. His expression was completely grim. He said, "They're trying to steal the title to your house today." Right then, my personal phone buzzed violently in my pocket. It was a text from Vance. The screen read, "Hey, I need to stop by the house. Dr. Thorne suggested a standard separation agreement." The message continued, "It's just to protect us both during the 72-hour break. I'll be there at 6:30. I shoved the phone across the desk. I showed the screen to Detective Stellan. We both knew exactly what that document really was. It wasn't a separation agreement. It was a quitclaim deed. Vance was coming to trick me into signing the house over entirely. By 5:30 p.m., I was standing back in my own Adina kitchen. Detective Stellan was standing by my stainless refrigerator. 2 uniformed officers were waiting in the hallway closet. Stellan reached into a black canvas bag. He pulled out a tiny wired camera lens. He placed the hidden camera deep inside the fake pothos plant. The plant sat right on the edge of the granite kitchen island. A hidden camera to catch a grifter. Stellan looked at me. His voice was dead serious. "Get him to explain the document on tape. We need absolute proof of his intent to defraud." I just nodded. I gripped the edge of the granite counter. My heart was pure ice. At exactly 6:30 p.m., I heard the key in the heavy oak front door. The deadbolt clicked. I stood perfectly still behind the kitchen island. Vance walked into the hallway. He was wearing his gray peacoat. That cloying, warm vanilla scent filled the kitchen immediately. It made my stomach physically turn. He looked exhausted. He ran a hand through his hair. He let out a long, heavy sigh. It was a flawless performance of a broken, hurting man. He walked over to the granite counter. He pulled a thick stack of papers from his leather briefcase. He set them gently on the island. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at the gray floor tiles. He said, "This is just a formality, Astrid, for the therapy process." I crossed my arms. I glanced slightly at the fake pothos plant. I kept my voice perfectly flat. I said, "What exactly am I signing, Vance?" He finally looked up. I stared right into his pale green eyes. I felt absolute zero empathy. He said, "It's just a temporary asset separation agreement. Dr. Thorne said it establishes healthy financial boundaries for the weekend." I looked down at the paper. The top header was partially covered by his left hand, but I could see the bold black letters. Quitclaim deed. He was trying to take the very floor I was standing on. He was trying to hand my home to a convicted Florida scammer. I needed him to say the lie out loud. I asked, "Does this document change who owns the house?" He shook his head. He looked right into my face and delivered the fatal lie. "No, Astrid, the house stays in both our names, I promise." The hidden camera in the plant recorded every single syllable. The trap was fully sprung. He had just committed felony attempted fraud on tape. He pulled a heavy gold pen from his coat pocket. He slid the pen across the kitchen island. Instead of picking it up, I nodded to the detective stepping out from the hallway. Detective Stellan stepped out of the hallway closet. Vance froze, his hand still hovering over the forged quitclaim deed. The heavy gold pen slipped from his fingers. It clattered loudly against the granite kitchen island. Vance didn't even look at the detective. He just stared at me. His face went entirely slack. The exhausted, broken husband routine vanished in a single second. "Astrid," he whispered, his voice shaking. "What did you do?" I didn't answer. I just pointed to the fake pothos plant on the counter. The tiny wired camera lens was blinking a steady red light. I watched his eyes track from the plant to the thick stack of papers. Then he looked at the detective's silver badge. The math was finally mathing for him. He realized I had recorded every single lie. Stellan read him his rights right there in our kitchen. The metal handcuffs clicked sharp and loud in the quiet room. Vance was arrested for felony attempted fraud and forgery. They walked him out the heavy oak front door. his gray peacoat brushed against the doorframe. I didn't even watch him leave. 3 hours later, Wayzata police raided the $3 million townhouse on Willow Creek Lane. They found Cleo Rayland packing a brown leather duffel bag. She was wearing that same emerald green dress from the dash cam video. She tried to play the victim, of course. She told the cops Vance manipulated her into everything. But Sterling and I had already handed over the cheap black burner phone. Her own text messages from October 17th proved she orchestrated the entire HELOC scam. The glossy business cards tied her directly to the corrupt mobile notary in Minnetonka. There was no talking her way out of a federal wire fraud conspiracy. The next few months were a brutal blur of court dates and bank meetings. I sat in Sterling's 42nd floor office overlooking downtown Minneapolis. We slammed Wells Fargo with the forged loan documents and the official police report. I watched the bank manager's face go pale when he saw the Miami mugshot. Because we proved the bright blue ink notary stamp was completely fraudulent, the bank had no choice. They voided the $350,000 HELOC. The title to the Adina house was legally cleared. 6 months later, I walked down my front driveway to the mailbox. The late autumn air was crisp and biting. Inside was a thick manila envelope from Hennepin County Court. I sat at the granite kitchen island and opened it. It was the final divorce decree and property settlement. The judge awarded me 100% of the marital assets as restitution. Vance is currently sitting in a county jail cell awaiting his federal sentencing. I stood up and looked around the kitchen. I remembered the day he first told me Dr. Thorne recommended a separation. He had stood right in this exact spot 6 months ago. He was crying those fake, pathetic tears. Now the kitchen was bathed in warm morning light. It smelled like my vanilla hazelnut coffee, not her cheap cloying perfume. I ran my hand over the cold granite countertop. It belongs entirely to me. Every brick, every gray floor tile, every single room. I'm sharing this because I know someone out there is sitting in the dark right now. You're questioning your own sanity, just like I was. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it there? Drop a comment. I read every single one. If your gut is screaming at you, please listen to it. Drop a like if the story hit you. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more about how I rebuilt my life. Turn on notifications and hit that bell so you don't miss what I do next. Because Vance thought he had it all figured out. He drew up the blueprints of our life to benefit himself. He thought he could redesign my reality without my permission. But he forgot one thing. I'm the architect.